moral realism and what it means to make a moral choice. So what I want to talk about is the idea of Jewish values. Many people talk about Jewish value, for example, the Jewish value of life, the Jewish value of education, etc., and not exactly how to define what a value is. Because I think it's important that we teach values, especially values to our children, grandchildren, anybody who will listen, as well that we have a basic understanding what the word means. As you can hear from the word, value means something that a person values. Now, there are basically two kinds of values traditionally. I'm going to add a third kind of value. There are what are called moral values. There are what are called non-moral values. And there are what I'm going to call immoral values. Now, some people say that immoral values is a subset of moral values, but I'm going to treat them differently. A moral value, in general, is something obligate a person in all places at all times. It's a general way to think about it. So, for example, if I hold the value of respect for life, you might say it's a value articulated in the Jewish tradition, but it is not a uniquely Jewish value. There are many other philosophical systems, religious systems, etc., that value human life. Now, the problem throughout human history is that most cultures, most systems within cultures have preferred the value of the in-group and not out-groups. So even if we look, for example, at Greece, which is the founding of the ideas of the liberal state, they had values for the citizens, they had values, a different set of values regarding slaves, for foreigners, barbarians, etc. You see this in the Bible as well. Oftentimes the Bible stresses that this value applies to the Ezrach, the citizen, vehager. Ger in biblical Hebrew did not mean a person who converted to Judaism, but rather to a sojourner. And there were some things that only applied to the people of Israel. For example, a person in poverty. It says very clearly, when someone of your kinfolk falls into poverty, meaning a person passing through did not, for example, enjoy the same rights and privileges as a citizen. Now, there are some people who fault that and say, shouldn't anybody who lives in the region have the same rights and privileges? Perhaps so. My personal opinion is yes. But again, the Bible is a product of its environment. And every ancient people, when they talked about, for example, respect for life, liberty, property, to paraphrase from our declaration, typically the values were there, but they shifted for the Ezrach, for the citizen, and for the stranger. What is a non-moral value? A non-moral value, for example, is education. People say it's a Jewish value, and again, I would prefer to say it's a value, a non-moral value, stressed in the Jewish tradition, but not quite what you think. Now, why is it a non-moral value? A person can be educated or not educated and be an immoral person. We certainly know this from modern history. There were people who did not respect life, who murdered other people, who took away the liberty of other people, and were quite educated. And we also know that sometimes there were very simple, uneducated people that had an instinctive respect for life, even at risk of their own lives. Many people, when I say education is not a moral value, it's a value but not a moral value, again, because you can be educated and be immoral or non-educated and be moral. Now, what about this oft-times cited Jewish value of education? When you go back to the Talmudic period, the great value was the study of the tradition, to study Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, our rabbinic text. And as far as what else one should learn, clearly one should learn a trade. And to the degree that people study what were called the sciences, if you look especially in the medieval literature, the sciences were understood as ways to know God. Now, many people think of the opposition between religion and science. The classical world and in the medieval theology, science, natural sciences, were under departments of theology. The idea of the opposition between religion and science is a relatively new phenomenon since the Enlightenment. Now, why would the study of mathematics, physics, biology, architecture, anything in the natural science, mathematics and natural sciences, why would that be under departments of theology? Because remember, there is a strong belief that the world is produced by the mind and word of God, and therefore to study nature is to study a different version of the mind and will of God. So it's very clearly, for example, in Maimonides and other medieval theologians, Islamic, Jewish, and Christian, all the way up through the very famous Kabbalist from Italy, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, often referred to as the Ramchal, where he again saw the study of mathematics, physics, and sciences as a way to understand the mind of God. So education in the Jewish tradition was focused on the study of our tradition, Torah and rabbinic writings, which themselves, remember, were understood in some way as being issued from the mind of God. Certainly Torah and prophetic books, prophets channeled the mind of God. There's a statement in the Talmud that after the destruction of the first temple, the prophecy gave way to the sages. It says the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim, went from the prophets to the sages. So the rabbis of the Second Temple and Talmudic periods were understood to be people who operated under the divine spirit. Now, this is not going to sound organic to Judaism because many people talk about they're operating under the divine spirit. It sounds a little bit Christian to people when I first introduced the idea. Well, the idea of operating under Ruach Elohim is in the Bible. Prophets operated under the spirit of the divine. It says in the Talmud that the spirit of the divine passed from the prophets to the sages. So the sages understood themselves that when they interpreted the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, let's say, itself understood to be communicated by the prophet Moses to the people of Israel and to all humankind. To interpret the Torah was to interpret prophecy, and then the sages taught, who eventually became the rabbis. So we'll just now call them Chazal, the Chachamenu Zichronam Livracha. The Chazal refers to the sages and the rabbis, where they thought when they were looking at the Word of God and bringing out the meaning, they were operating under the divine spirit. So that's why the idea is an authorized interpreter came to being, and the rabbis tried to set out what they called the rules for interpreting Torah, because the meaning of Torah is not what anybody thought it meant. This is a very, very hard area precisely to find, but the rabbis understood that there were people who understood what the text was saying as they tried to bring the Word of God into the world, and those who didn't. Even the study of Torah is not really about education, although there is education involved. The deeper level of it is how to bring the living Word of God out from the text. So the Jewish value of education, when you look at its traditional sources, was regarding the study of the word and will of God as expressed in text, as expressed in human conscience, and as expressed in nature. Now, this idea of study then transferred over in the Enlightenment, not to an education in what was understood to be, for example, nature as the Word of God, but you might say medicine as a profession, medicine as helping people, but not studying medicine, for example, or mathematics because it was connected to the mind and will of God. Rigor, Talmudic academic study was provided to any academic discipline. So when people say to me the Jewish value of education, I would say, well, education is valued. It's probably a value that is not unique to the Jewish tradition, but certainly focused on in the Jewish tradition, taken from the value of studying the mind and will of God, and then it becomes secularized that every child should have a college education. I hope you can see from studying the mind and will of God in text, in the human soul, in nature, the natural sciences and mathematics, to everybody should have a college degree. Now, the downside of this, as you know, that oftentimes when people go to study a college degree in the humanities or social sciences, it has taken on a very anti-religious demeanor. And that's something that troubles me. Certainly when I was in school, I was a religion major, so it wasn't so anti-religious in the religion department at USC, where I received my undergraduate and graduate degree. But in general, there was the idea that knowledge and religion differed from each other, that religion was superstition, religion was acting under authority. Somehow the academic study in the social sciences and humanities was relieved of all biases, influences, and was purely rational pursuit of, as it were, pure rational knowledge. Well, I knew that wasn't the case when I began because I could see the biases and the prejudices laced all the way through the humanities and social sciences, which leads to my topic for today, that whatever a person studies, whatever our people study, because I'm going to speak now as a rabbi, but I think also as a person who has a doctorate in religion and social ethics. So I want to speak to anybody of any religion and anybody who wants to be a moral person. By the way, the Latin word morals comes from mores, customs, and it becomes something like what I'll describe in a moment. Morals is Latin-based, ethics is Greek-based. They're really synonymous. And I'll talk about in a moment how scholars like to use this coincidence that in English we have two words that are basically synonymous from two different language systems. So my 10 minutes of intro to Judaism today is the idea of Jewish values. There are moral values. I'll just focus here on the respect for life, and then the non-moral value of education, and realizing that moral values in general apply to all people, all times, everywhere, theoretically. So the value of respect for life is not a Jewish value. It's a value that the Jews have because everybody should have the value. A value like education, again, is not a moral value because a person can be educated and immoral and non-educated and moral. So it's very well when you talk about values. And I'll talk about this more in just a moment, what we're going to call moral values and non-moral values and how one understands moral values.